All right, folks, from the shores of the North Saskatchewan River, right here in scenic Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Canada. This is your host, Jack Antonio, for Do You Know Jack, the podcast. And on the line, I have a guy who likely wants to think that he's evil incarnate. I mean, he definitely has an anti-religious agenda. This is Evan Salvador of a pile of priests who have just released a brilliant self-titled album. So it's pile of priests. Just totally out there with it. The man himself, Evan Salvador. How are you doing, man? After that bizarrely unorganized introduction.
I am doing well. Thank you for the compliments. I'll take that to heart.
Well, now
might go to my ego first, though.
Yeah, well, I mean that's okay though. I mean you've been at it a while. I mean here it's 10 years and change of death metal fuckery. Here you are. What have you learned? What would you do differently? What would Elvin Salvador 2020 tell Elvin Salvador 2009?
Man, that is a solid question.
I know I just came out fucking guns blazing, like right away, like
I like that. Yeah, that's a deep cut right there. Geez. I guess it would be to stay focused, like place a goal and keep it in sight. It's easy to get distracted with everything else going on. And not to say that, if you have an idea of what you want to create with the band and what you want to portray, run with it. And things are going to change over time because obviously, our taste in music changes, our influences change. So the music will likely, reflect that. If you're, progressive, or if you it's like Chuck Schuldiner, great example. Every Death record is not the same. Everyone is different, not to mention different musicians on each record, but he had a different vision going into each album.
Yeah.
And for me, he was one of the biggest influences, and I kind of took that approach too, like, okay, here was this record, what can I do differently, what do I need to improve on? Where initially we started out as a death kind of thrash type of thing.
That's true, yeah.
And just gradually moved into more of the progressive realm and sticking more towards death metal, but adding elements of all sorts of different stuff that I was, really fascinated by over the years.
Yeah, true. And I mean, don't get me wrong, because I really enjoy the record. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I'm a huge death metal mark, and I mean, you had me when you mentioned Chuck, man. I mean, holy shit, like Human, for instance, probably one, musically, one of the greatest metal records of all time, let alone one of the greatest death metal records of all time. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
And there's so much more to it, man. I mean, death is like an onion. You just peel it off in layers, but it always leaves you fucking crying.
Absolutely. Yes. That's a great description. I like that.
I just came up with that like on the spot. That's literally, You're I don't know if I don't even know if I'm like over caffeinated or what, but my brain feels like it's going a mile a minute right now. I think I've been locked in, shut into my own house for far too long, and all of a sudden all these ideas are coming, just bubbling to the surface. Probably not unlike yourself though on a regular day, right? I mean, because this new record, the self-titled record, not only are you, showing some progressive metal mastery, but I mean, you've also got a whole concept to this fucker, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. It was a challenge. I started the album, the writing process, when I had the idea. This would have been late summer, early fall of 2017.
So it's been a while in the making.
Yeah. The production is what really took a long time. This should have been released a year ago, but we won't get into that. Anyways, so I started writing everything towards the end of 2017, and it took me about a year to write everything. And it takes me a long time to put all my thoughts together, and especially since this was a concept, I had to like write the story like kind of as I was going. I didn't just write. I mapped out an idea of what I wanted to do with it, but I didn't have the whole story set in stone. And that was where it was kind of fun, like writing each song. And I did it all in order so that each song kind of goes along with what's happening in the story. And that way I could create the emotion and figure out the lyrics along with what was happening with the music.
Yeah, for sure. Well, now I was thinking, like what is the? I mean, without giving up too much of the like spoiler alert kind of thing. But I mean, what are you getting at here in this album? I mean, give us the Cliff Notes version of this record and what it's all about.
Sure. I will give you the rundown of the concept. Basically, the plot summary. It takes place centuries ago in a universe unlike our own, or not unlike our own, rather. So an exiled priest, or sorry, Jesus, I'm mixing up all my ideas here in one.
Not hard to do in this day and age, man.
Indeed. An exiled prince of a kingdom ruled by a deranged king seeks out the help of a powerful sorceress to end his father's reign of a slave-like religion and avenge his rebellious sister who became a martyr after her execution.
Interesting. I mean, and I would imagine then the voice of the sorceress is the gal that I'm hearing, come up a couple times on the record. I have her name in front of me, but I'm too lazy to look through my notes right now.
That's exactly correct. Yeah, Adrian Cowan.
There it is.
Yeah, she's the sorceress in the story, and she was fantastic. When I first started writing and having ideas for this, I really wanted to add a female vocalist somewhere in the album. And there's a couple girls in the Denver metal scene that I had in mind who I'm good friends with, and they're phenomenal. But when I heard Adrian's from a band called Seven Spires, and when I heard their debut record, I was just absolutely blown away. So I reached out to her. She expressed her interest in doing it, and strangely enough, me and my bass player, we went to the 70,000 Tons of Metal cruise in 2018.
Oh.
And Seven Spires was also booked that year, so we got to talk in person, and it was interesting how that all came together.
Her voice scares the shit out of me at times.
It's beautiful, beautifully frightening.
Now, I was going to say now, I mean, this is a little reminiscent of Operation Mindcrime, right? I mean, Adrian's sort of your Sister Mary.
That's a great way to look at it, actually, yeah. One of my favorite concept albums of all time, Queensryche, that was like the apex, They didn't quite create the magic when they did Operation Mindcrime 2, but the first one was just an opus of sorts. It's funny, like that really wasn't like an inspiration to me. But looking back on it now, I see the similarities, and maybe it was like in my subconscious.
I think it's in the subconscious of anybody that does anything remotely progressive in metal, whether it be death or like fucking Dream Theater shit.
Absolutely.
Well, now riddle me this. I mean, you've got this big story going on here. It's a concept. It's very, carefully laid out. It sounds a little fantasy, sci-fi kind of theme. So, I mean, this is maybe a absolutely stupid, fucking obvious question, but I mean, are you a fan of that genre of reading materials?
I err more on the side of fantasy, like Lord of the Rings.
Right.
That kind of stuff is really what interests me, and the story of The Witcher, stuff like that. That's definitely kind of what was a bit of an inspiration of where I was going to go with this.
Yeah.
I'm not so much on the sci-fi side. I mean, I guess you could put it in that realm too, but it was definitely more on like the fantasy, because this takes. I imagine it being more like a medieval kind of setting.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, well, you mentioned The Witcher. I mean, I'm assuming you've watched the Netflix. Is it Netflix special?
It was Netflix, correct.
Yeah. It wasn't bad, was it? I mean, it was confusing as fuck with the timeline, but you almost need a map for that. But
exactly right. And, if I hadn't read some of the books and didn't play The Witcher 3, I would have been totally lost. So even though it's like a prequel to the Witcher 3, and you get these, like, as the story goes, then you start to realize, oh, this is so-and-so, and this is their upbringing and everything. And I had to watch, a couple of the episodes twice to really figure out, like, all right, what the fuck is going on? It was well done.
Yeah.
Cryptic in so many ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, now Yennefer, like, she was in that one place for 30 years, but they never bother to fucking tell you that. So then when you go back, you're like, oh, 30 years went by. Well, that makes sense. I think maybe they, like, name drop it somewhere. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, they don't pay me to, like, figure out friggin' complicated, fantasy, plot lines. Maybe if I played the game, it would make more sense. Like you said, I've never played the game, so there you go.
Yeah, and I mean, well, that's kind of the problem with like movies and TV shows and stuff. Well, with TV shows, they definitely have more time to explain things, but they didn't touch on that all that much. All of a sudden, she's just kind of like, oh, she knows exactly what she's doing. She's all
Yeah.
super hot now. She is seducing everybody and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now musically, like you mentioned that you recorded this album sequentially. So, I mean, where do your ideas start? Is death metal, so you got that guttural thing going on. But I mean, you're also the guitar player in this three-piece. So, what's the deal there in terms of how you write?
So for when we first started, we would write music in like a band practice setting. A lot of the songs all came together when we got together to practice. And this is with our old drummer. He was definitely more thrash oriented. So for the first, the demo and the first EP, Unholy Death, we wrote the majority of that together. And then as I kind of started writing new stuff, I realized I needed to sit down and really kind of plan my attacks for what I wanted to do. And it would allow me to elaborate on certain parts of the music and give it more time that it deserved. And I realized that, like, I never want to just shit out a product that I'm going to end up hating, years down the line. So I really take every riff into consideration, every passage of the songs, and I really have to think about it, because so many times I'll write a riff and I'm like, nope, that's been done before. This has been done before, so it's kind of harder that way, but in the end, I'm way happier.
Yeah,
with the way it all comes.
Well, I can imagine so. And I mean, some of the stuff you're doing, I mean, it's pretty complex, which, begs the question now in terms of like formal training and stuff. I mean, what made you even want to pick up the guitar in the first place? Why death metal? Because, I mean, the majority of, well-adjusted fine folk are like death metal. Who gives a flying fuck? I mean, what made you get into this whole realm of the spectrum? You know what I mean?
That is a long-winded question. I won't bore you with all the details. We'll kind of do a little bit. We'll jump from topics here. So
give me the Witcher, confusing Witcher explanation of your musical upbringing.
People are going to have to go back and listen to this numerous times to figure out what I'm talking about. So when I was, I must have been like, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, or whenever it might have been. My dad was playing the video game Quake 2.
Yeah.
And Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails did the soundtrack, and that really got me into heavy music. That shit blew my mind. I'd never heard anything like it. It's just the intensity, and it was great. And I was so young and impressionable, and I had a phase of like really shitty, like not necessarily nu metal, but like Disturbed and Cold and 3 Days Grace. And I can't believe I'm even like saying this out loud. People don't need to know this.
Do not say Korn. Do not put Korn in that category. I swear to God.
That was never one of them, believe it or not.
Because I actually like that band.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I had nothing to say because I was never a fan. It never really crossed my path. Linkin Park was in there too, but...
You got to respect them.
Eventually, my friend showed me Slayer and Iron Maiden and Deicide, and I was like, okay, this is the business right here. And from there, I really developed, my own kind of taste, and I went on my own path of what I wanted to listen to. And yeah, Chuck Schuldiner of Death really stood out to me. And as far as like an influence, because I used to play bass, I only had training with bass when I was probably like 12 years old. I started picking it up.
Wow.
Probably took lessons for about a year. And then decided to switch to guitar. And mainly that was because of Chuck Schuldiner. And my other biggest influence, which would be Eddie Van Halen.
Nice. That's a diverse spectrum right there. Well, I mean, the Eddie stuff likely explains some of that neoclassicism in your soloing.
Yeah, I definitely like to, dissect it in a way that's not like, just, your generic sweeps and stuff. And I'm a firm believer that solos don't have to be overly complicated to suck you in. Some of the best parts of a solo is when they stop and they're just laying on one note for like 5-10 seconds, and just like kind of like silkily moving in between each of those notes. And that's some of the best parts when it stops and it's not so noodly.
Yeah.
So to find a good balance in between, like, yeah, you can shred, but also like, bring it in, like bring you that heart wrenching shit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, now Denver though, like there's metal in the Mile High City.
Oh, Denver. Oh man. We are spoiled out here. Let me tell you what.
Really? I was waiting for there was a pregnant pause. I was like, what have I done? What vile evil is about to spew forth from this man?
A pregnant pause. I like that. Rightfully so. Yeah. Denver is pregnant with so many fantastic bands that are just waiting to be born, into like more of the limelight, so to speak. It's shit. Like there isn't like, well, before the coronavirus and everything, there wasn't a weekend or, like any given Friday and Saturday, there was at least like 3 metal shows going on, whether that's touring bands or just local bands. And depending on what sect of the scene of local music you're into, there's always live bands playing. And not to mention all like the successful bands from Colorado too. We got a Legion from Fort Collins, Cephalic Carnage from Denver, Blood Incantation, shit, the list goes on. Dreadnought.
Wow. Yeah, I was gonna say who in your opinion are the biggest metal douchebags in the entire great state of Colorado, but you just name drop a couple of solid choices there. I mean douchebags in a very affectionate sense, not like a friendly,
put down friendly douchebag.
Well, now, given the fact now that you guys have been around for as long as you have, I mean, you must hold court and have a certain amount of stature amongst these, these bands. I mean, you're not in the upper echelon per se, but being a mid-card status, you can probably put a few bands over from time to time, right?
Definitely. I've gotten very picky over the last few years about what shows we do play. One of the big things was that after our drummer left, our first drummer in 2012, we haven't been as active in the scene. But, there's a difference between staying active and then oversaturating.
Fair.
And a lot of bands oversaturate, where if they're playing a couple times a month, people aren't going to go see them, every show they play because they've already played, twice that month already.
Yeah.
So you got to pick your poison. You got to plan these shows out correctly. I refuse to play, tiny, smelly bar gigs anymore. But also because our bass player works out of state, he's a wind turbine technician and travels all around the United States. And so he's usually gone for 3 to 4 months at a time, usually comes home maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months.
What an asshole having like a regular job and shit.
I know, being all successful and stuff with his own career. How dare he?
Oh, I told you I was way off on a tangent today, man. I just everything is like causing me to react.
That's good. You're on one. So anyway, yeah, it's we definitely have to pick and choose what shows we want to play. Luckily, some promoters in town, so we are able to get on some of the bigger name shows that come through, which is always great. It's the best way for bands to get known is because a lot of fans don't come out of the woodwork to go to local shows. If you're opening for a big name band, they would have never heard of you any other way because they don't go to these local shows. So they're like, oh, damn, that opener was sick. And they would have never known if they didn't show up early.
Yeah, that's disappointing. I mean, that's just a fickle nature of people these days. I mean, maybe this quarantine can actually serve a purpose and get us to appreciate what we already have and what we need to go see when we get the fuck out of these basement dungeons that we've placed ourselves in.
Now you're thinking exactly. So they know what they've missed out on, like any excuse to get out of the house. Hopefully it sticks. Because I like where you're going with that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, now there's been a lot of like, live content and things like that. But I mean, now this is something that I haven't considered in the last few weeks that I've sort of been out and about talking to different artists. Because I talk to artists across many genres. I mean, it's not just death metal, but I mean, now you want to get out there, you want to keep your brand moving, as the curve flattens, as it were. But I mean, what do you do? I mean, because you can't necessarily do like live online Zoom shit, can you? Like, I mean, do you guys have a plan to do things online at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. Since the record will be released on May 22nd, unless there's some kind of hiccup with, everything going on, it
Right.
should be released on the 22nd of May. And we were, before all this went down, we were planning a CD release show. Now that's kind of a kibosh because we're not entirely sure when, concerts are going to be able to get back in a swing. But we have thought about the options, and we're kind of looking at things to make it happen, to do a live stream concert of the CD release. So we're
Yeah.
looking at maybe early June, but there's a lot of logistics that go into that. So we have a lot of planning to do in order to make that happen.
I've heard it's difficult to find a platform where you guys can be in different buildings but play together. I don't, I mean, I'm just starting to get into the Zoom thing. I've never thought about doing video content until now, so I don't quote me on that.
Yeah, and I think the only proper way to execute it would be to get us all in one venue setting, but obviously put us far enough apart.
Yeah, you gotta. It's 2 meters, man. That this is what our prime minister has come out and officially said. You got to keep 2 meters apart. It's
That's
yeah.
right.
I would like. How are things? How are things going in Colorado in terms of flattening the curve now? I mean, what's it looking like? Because I mean, we see the outlandish news conferences that are coming, on a daily basis. But a lot of the stuff that's been happening is, maybe rightly so from New York and New York City, where, it's ground zero. But I mean, what's Colorado looking like?
I think we've done a good job at flattening the curve a bit, so to speak. They are already, we're one of a few states that are already kind of opening stuff up again as of a couple days ago. It would have
Oh,
been
wow.
Monday, where a lot of companies kind of went back in. The governor said, in regards to, strict social distancing practices and everybody wearing a face mask. Now, it hasn't been an executive order as a mandatory thing to wear the face mask. It's just strongly suggested, which
Yeah.
still out and about, it's kind of like half and half with people. You're not going to I mean, it's it's a bit convoluted. I honestly think it's probably too early to be getting things back to the way they were, or getting people out there, at least putting it in their heads that things are somewhat returning to normal.
Yeah,
Like
I
we
would
saw,
disagree with that.
not personally, but 100 years ago, they kind of backed off of the quarantine and shit. And then the second wave hit, and it was twice as bad as the first one. So if history repeats itself and we can't learn from it, we got a rude awakening coming up here pretty soon.
Yeah, the lessons of the Spanish flu and us not wanting history to repeat itself. But I mean, it's easy to look back and judge them, but now we're living it and going, oh my God, I just want to get out of the goddamn house. I want to go to Walmart and buy like cat litter or some shit.
We need to take our selfish tendencies and put that aside, and realize that, to save the future sooner, we can just, be extra precautious.
Yeah. Well, now I was gonna say, given the fact that you're, you're putting out a concept record. I mean, now here does the death metal concept of mass plague and worldwide pandemic, is that just right off the table for the next 15 or 20 years now that we're pretty much fucking living it? Like, is that just taboo, do you think, in your own honest opinion? Or is it the perfect time to crank out a concept record all about us dying of some random disease?
I think it's going to be one of those things where it's like, when this is over, like, oh great, another song about coronavirus and the pandemic. Oh boy, here we go. What kind of deep insight do they have to, shed light on? And I think it's going to be a little overused. But it's funny as hell that Cattle Decapitation just released something. I don't know. It was like November or December, and they had the song "Bring Back the Plague," and it's just almost way too accurate. Like, what the hell, guys? And it's funny to see that all play out. So they already had that in mind, and then bam, here we are.
Yeah. Well, now who would have thought that Cattle Decapitation could be such prophets?
Man, they certainly have turned into it. I'll tell you what. Holy shit.
Maybe there's something in the Bible about, that we can decipher some sort of weird coded prophetic message about cattle decapitation.
Where are the Bible experts to explain this? Too bad we killed off David Koresh in '93. He might have some.
Damn! Shit just got real. Well, listen, man, I should just really quickly here mention that your record, and I mean, you've mentioned it before as well, it's dropping... Man, my notes are just all over the place. May 22nd. It's the self-titled record by Pile of Priests. Evan Salvador, the evil genius, the man with razor blades in his throat, gargling up some kind of hell and damnation, and also shredding the fuck out of the guitar. So well done. You are a double threat. I don't know what you'd have to do for a triple threat. You'd have to dance or something.
That's next, choreography in death metal.
Right. Well, now here you're a concept guy. Write a death metal Broadway play.
Oh my God! Yeah, I'll need Mel Brooks first of all, and I'm going to need a large budget, so maybe a few more stimulus packages while we're at it.
For sure. Well, listen, man, thanks a lot for joining me here on Do You Know Jack the podcast, man. Just been a great time. We've had a lot of fun, and it's nice to have that momentary escape from the reality of the situation that we're in. And like I said, pick up the Pile of Priests album, because not only is it a great concept record, but musically it is first rate. 2 thumbs up from this guy, 3 thumbs up even. Whatever that means.
Maybe a toe in there.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, Evan, thank you so much for your time, man. Much appreciated. It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to chat with you today.
Perfect. It's been my pleasure, my man. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one.
Take it easy. You too.
Bye-bye.